What's up, Pants? Yeah? Come on. You can sit in my lap. Hey. No, Slick. You're so cute. Hi, and welcome back to Storytime. Today we are continuing with Northanger Abbey, which is I love this snarky one. My favorite part in the first part was definitely where Jane Austen went on this 2-page rant about when authors fiction reader shame in the middle of her chapter. And yeah, so we'll see if we have any more surprises like that in store. Just a warning. Oh, hey, Diamond Minecrafter, how are you doing? Just wanted to give you a warning that I forgot to take my Allegra D, so if I get very froggy, that is why. I'm glad you could make it today, Diamond Minecrafter. By the way, after my Storytime stream, I am hoping to do some more RuneScape. We'll see if I do, like, another little tour, maybe some dungeoneering. I might do some quests. It's anybody's game. We'll see. How have you been, by the way, this week? How's your week been going? Oh, no. I'm so sorry to hear that. So she's in room quarantine. That's got to be rough. I hope she's not showing any really rough symptoms. Apparently, I found out that possibly both of my parents, but definitely my brother caught it over the holiday when they were visiting. But they didn't have any remaining symptoms left over. Like, they got their smell back and everything like that. They were just like a little under the weather, displaying a little under the weather when they had it, and came out fine. So, oh, that's good. I hope it doesn't get any worse, and I hope that she is able to walk away with it, or away from it, at full health with all of her systems still doing good. But I will think very positive and healing thoughts for her. And I hope, I definitely know you guys are taking your precautions. Does she have things that she is able to do to, keep her company while she's doing her quarantine? You are very welcome. I must say, we are super, super lucky that we have the internet during all of this, COVID outbreak and all of that stuff. So, kids can keep going to school, keep learning People can still do their jobs remotely if they're able to. I mean, I don't have a job where I can do it remotely because I'm in retail. But they also have the ability to watch TV shows and, keep in touch with people. So I'm very glad that we're not having to live through, the outbreak that happened 100 years ago, kind of swept the world. They called it the Spanish flu, even though that's not really a proper name for it, because Spain was the only ones who were brave enough to say, hey, guess what? This thing is happening. And everybody else in the world who, it was happening to them, they're like, oh no, that's terrible. What? It's here too. Oh no, you brought it here. But really, it was everywhere. But yeah, I can only imagine what it would have been like back then, or even back in the early to mid 1800s when Northanger Abbey is happening. It's really interesting reading this to see how they had to jump through so many hoops because society made it so difficult to make acquaintances, because you don't just go up and start talking to somebody. You have to be introduced. You have to know somebody. And it's like, my word, it's a miracle that anybody knew anybody. But I'm going to go ahead and continue. And if you missed the first part, don't worry, I have it all up on my YouTube. I'll put that up there, so just in case. And hey, if your mom likes listening to stories, I've got many, many days worth on my YouTube. And all kinds of stories, too. All right, so we will, just a little reminder for people, when I'm doing the chatting at the beginning and at the end, or when I'm doing a little bit of chatting between chapters, this guy right here, Maestro, he is going to be showing. But when I hide him like this, that is where I will be reading. All right. Chapter 9. The progress of Catherine's unhappiness from the events of the evening was as follows. It appeared first in a general dissatisfaction that with everybody about her, while she remained in the room, which speedily brought on considerable weariness and the violent desire to go home. This, on arriving in Pulteney Street, took the direction of extraordinary hunger, and when that was appeased, changed into an earnest longing to be in bed. Such was the extreme point of her distress, for when there she immediately fell into a sound sleep, which lasted 9 hours, and from which she woke perfectly revived, in excellent spirits, with fresh hopes and fresh schemes. The first wish of her heart was to improve her acquaintance with Miss Tinley, and almost her first resolution to seek her for that purpose in the pump-room at noon. In the pump-room, one so newly arrived in Bath must be met with, and that building she had already found so favorable for the discovery of female excellence, and the completion of female intimacy, so admirably adapted for secret discourses and unlimited confidence, that she was most reasonably encouraged to expect another friend from within its walls. Her plan for the morning thus settled, she sat quietly down to her book after breakfast, resolving to remain in the same place and the same employment till the clock struck 1, and from habitude very little incommoded by the remarks and ejaculations of Mrs. Allen, whose vacancy of mind and incapacity for thinking were such that as she never talked a great deal, so she could never be entirely silent, and therefore, while she sat at her work, if she lost her needle or broke her thread, if she heard a carriage on the street or saw a speck upon her gown, she must observe it aloud, whether there was anyone at leisure to answer her or not. That sounds like my mom. At about 12:30, a remarkably loud rap drew her in haste to the windows, and scarcely had she time to inform Catherine of there being 2 open carriages at the door, and in the first only a servant, her brother driving, Miss Thorpe in the second, before John Thorpe came running upstairs, calling out, "Well, Miss Moreland, here I am. Have you been waiting long? We could not come before. The old devil of a coachmaker was such an eternity finding out a thing fit to be got into. And now it is 10,000 to 1, but they break down before we are out of the street. How do you do, Mrs. Allen? A famous ball last night, was it not? Come, Miss Moreland, be quick, for the others are in a confounded hurry to be off. They want to get their tumble over." "What do you mean?" said Catherine. "What are you all going to?" "Going to? Why, you have not forgotten our engagement. Did not we agree together to take a drive this morning? What a head you have! We're going up Claverton Down." "Something was said about it, I remember," said Catherine, looking at Mrs. Allen for her opinion. "But really I did not expect you." "Not expect me? That's a good one. I know what a dust you would have made if I had not come." Catherine's silent appeal to her friend, meanwhile, was entirely thrown away, for Mrs. Allen, not being at all in the habit of conveying any expression herself by a look, was not aware of it being ever intended by anybody else. And Catherine, whose desire of seeing Miss Tinley again could at that moment bear a short delay in favor of a drive, and who thought there could be no impropriety in her going with Mr. Thorpe, as Isabella was going at the same time with James, was therefore obliged to speak plainer. "Well, ma'am, what do you say to it? Can you spare me for an hour or two? Shall I go?" "Oh, do just as you please, my dear," replied Mrs. Allen with the most placid indifference. Catherine took the advice and ran off to get ready. In a very few minutes she reappeared, having scarcely allowed the two others time enough to get through a few short sentences in her praise, after Thorpe had procured Mrs. Allen's admiration of his gig, and then, receiving her friend's parting good wishes, they both hurried downstairs. "My dearest creature!" cried Isabella, to whom the duty of friendship immediately called her before she could get into the carriage. "You have been at least 3 hours getting ready. I was afraid you were ill. What a delightful ball we had last night. I have 1,000 things to say to you, but make haste and get in, for I long to be off." Catherine followed her orders and turned away, but not too soon to see her friend exclaim aloud to James, "What a sweet girl she is! I quite dote on her." "You will not be frightened, Miss Moreland," said Thorpe, as he handed her in. "If my horse should dance about a little for setting off, he will most likely give a plunge or two, and perhaps take the rest for a minute, but he will soon know his master. He is full of spirits, playful as can be, but there is no vice in him. Hey, Wholesome, good to see you. I'm glad you could make it. We just started chapter 9, so you've not missed much. And all have I put up? I think I did put up the first chapter on the YouTube, so you can go see that if you want to get caught up. And I'll chat between chapters. Catherine did not think the portrait a very inviting one, but it was too late to retreat, and she was too young to own herself frightened. So, resigning herself to her fate and trusting to the animal's boastful knowledge of its owner, she sat peaceably down and saw Thorpe sit down by her. Everything being then arranged, the servant who stood at the horse's head was bid to The servant who stood at the horse's head was bid in an important voice to let him go, and off they went in the quietest manner imaginable, without a plunge or a caper or anything like one. Catherine, delighted at so happy an escape, spoke her pleasure aloud with grateful surprise, and her companion immediately made the matter perfectly simple by assuring her that it was entirely owing to the peculiarly judicious manner in which he had then held the reins, and the singular discernment and dexterity with which he had directed his whip. Catherine, though she could not help wondering that with such perfect command of his horse he should think it necessary to alarm her with a relation of its tricks, congratulated herself sincerely on being under the care of so excellent a coachman, and perceiving that the animal continued to go on in the same quiet manner, without showing the smallest propensity towards any unpleasant vivacity, and, considering its inevitable pace was 10 miles an hour, by no means alarmingly fast, gave herself up to all the enjoyment of air and exercise of the most invigorating kind in a fine, mild day of February, with a consciousness of safety. A silence of several minutes succeeded their first short dialogue. It was broken by Thorpe saying very abruptly, "Old Alan is as rich as a merchant, is he not?" Catherine did not understand him, and he repeated his question, adding an exclamation. Old Alan, the man you were with." "Oh, Mr. Alan, you mean. Yes, I believe he is very rich." "And no children at all?" "No, not any." "A famous thing for his next heirs. He is your godfather, is not he?" "My godfather? No." "But you were always very much with him." "Yes, very much." "Aye, that is what I meant. He seems a good kind of old fellow enough, and has lived very well in his time, I dare say. He's not gouty for nothing. Does he drink his bottle a day now?" "His bottle a day? No. Why should you think of such a thing? He's a very temperate man, and you could not fancy him in liquor last night?" "Lord help you. You women are always thinking of men's being in liquor. Why, you do not suppose a man is overset by a bottle. I am sure of this, that if everybody was to drink their bottle a day, there would be there would not be half the disorders in the world there are now. It would be a famous good thing for us all." "I cannot believe it." "Oh, Lord, it would be the saving of thousands. There is not the 100th part of the wine consumed in this kingdom that there ought to be. Our foggy climate wants help." "And yet I have heard that there is a great deal of wine drunk in Oxford." "Oxford? There's no drinking at Oxford now, I assure you. Nobody drinks there. You would hardly meet with a man who goes beyond his 4 pints at the utmost. Now, for instance, it was reckoned a remarkable thing at the last party in my rooms that upon an average we closed about 5 pints ahead. It was looked upon as something out of the common way. Mine is famous good stuff, to be sure. You would not often meet with anything like it in Oxford, and that may account for it. But this will just give you a notion of the general rate of drinking there." "Yes, it does give a notion," said Catherine warmly, "and that is that you all drink a great deal more wine than I thought you did. However, I'm sure James does not drink so much." This declaration brought on a loud and overpowering reply, of which no part was very distinct, except the frequent exclamations, amounting almost to oaths, which adjoined it, and Catherine was left, when it ended, with rather a strengthened belief of there being a great deal of wine drunk in Oxford, and the same happy conviction of her brother's comparative sobriety. Thorpe's ideas then all reverted to the merits of his own equipage, and she was called on to admire the spirit and freedom with which his horse moved along, and the ease with which his paces, all well as the excellence of the springs, gave the motion of the carriage. She followed him in all of his admiration as well as she could. To go before or beyond him was impossible. His knowledge and her ignorance of the subject, his rapidity of expression, and her diffidence of herself put that out of her power, and she could strike out nothing new in commendation, but she readily echoed whatever he chose to assert, and it was finally settled between them without any difficulty that his equipage was altogether the most complete of its kind in England, his carriage the neatest, his horse the best goer, and himself the best coachman. "You do not really think, Mr. Thorpe," said Catherine, venturing after some time to consider the matter as entirely decided, and to offer some little variation on the subject, that James's gig will break down. Break down? Oh, Lord! Did you ever see such a little, tittipy thing in your life? There is not a sound piece of iron about it. The wheels have been fairly worn out these 10 years at least, and as for the body, upon my soul, you might shake it to pieces yourself with a touch. It is the most devilish little rickety business I ever beheld. Thank God we have got the better. I would not be bound to go 2 miles in it for £50,000. Good heavens! Cried Catherine, quite frightened. Then pray let us turn back. They will certainly meet with an accident if we go on. Do let us turn back, Mr. Thorpe. Stop and speak to my brother, and tell him how unsafe it is. Unsafe? Oh, Lord! What is there in that? They will only get a roll if it does break down, and there is plenty of dirt. It will be excellent falling. Oh, curse it! The carriage is safe enough, if a man knows how to drive it. A thing of that sort in good hands will last above 20 years after it is fairly worn out. Lord bless you! I would undertake for £5 to drive it to York and back again without losing a nail. Oh, goodness, the bravado! Catherine listened with astonishment. She knew not how to reconcile 2 such very different accounts of the same thing, for she had not been brought up to understand the propensities of a rattle, nor to know how many idle assertions and impudent falsehoods the excess of vanity will lead. Her own family were plain, matter-of-fact people who seldom aimed at wit of any kind. Her father at the utmost being contented with a pun, and her mother with a proverb. They were not in the habit, therefore, of telling lies to increase their importance, or of asserting at one moment what they would contradict the next. She reflected on the affair for some time in much perplexity, and was more than once on the point of requesting from Mr. Thorpe a clearer insight into his real opinion on the subject, but she checked herself, because it appeared to her that he did not excel in giving those clearer insights, in making those things plain which he had before made ambiguous, and, joining to this, the consideration that he was not really suffer his sister and his friend to be exposed to a danger from which he might easily preserve them, she concluded at last that he must know the carriage to be in fact perfectly safe, and therefore would alarm herself no longer. By him the whole matter seemed entirely forgotten, and all of the rest of his conversation, or rather talk, began and ended with himself and his own concerns. He told her of horses which he had bought for a trifle and sold for incredible sums, of racing matches in which his judgment had infallibly foretold the winner, of shooting parties in which he had killed more birds, though without having one good shot, than all his companions together, and described to her some famous day's sport with the foxhounds, in which his foresight and skill in directing the dogs had repaired the mistakes of the most experienced huntsmen, and in which the boldness of his riding, though it had never endangered his own life for a moment, had been constantly leading others into difficulties, which he calmly concluded and had broken the necks of many. Little as Catherine was in the habit of judging for herself, and unfixed as were her general notions of what men ought to be, she could not entirely repress a doubt, while she bore with the effusions of his endless conceit, of his being altogether completely agreeable. It was a bold surmise, for he was Isabella's brother, and she had been assured by James that his manners would recommend him to all her sex, but in spite of this, the extreme weariness of his company, which crept over her before they had been out an hour, and which continued unceasingly to increase until they stopped at Pulteney Street again, induced her in some small degree to resist such higher authority and to disrupt his power of giving universal pleasure. When they arrived at Mrs. Allen's door, the astonishment of Isabella was hardly to be expected on finding that it was too late in the day for them to attend her friend into the house. "Past 3 o'clock!" It was inconceivable, incredible, impossible, and she would neither believe her own watch, nor her brother, nor the servants. She would believe no assurance of it, founded on reason or reality, till Morland produced his watch and ascertained the fact. To have doubted a moment longer then would have been equally inconceivable, incredible, and impossible, and she could only protest over and over again that no 2 hours and a half had ever gone off so swiftly before, as Catherine was called on to confirm. Catherine could not tell a falsehood even to please Isabella, but the latter was spared the misery of her friend's dissenting voice by not waiting for her answer. Her own feelings entirely engrossed her. Her wretchedness was most acute on finding herself obliged to go directly home. It was ages since she had had a moment's conversation with her dearest Catherine, and though she had such thousands of things to say to her, it appeared as if they were never to be got together again. So, with smiles of most exquisite misery and the laughing eye of utter despondency, she bade her friend adieu and went on. Catherine found Mrs. Allen just returning from all the busy idleness of the morning, and was immediately greeted with, "Well, my dear, here you are," a truth which she had no greater inclination than power to dispute, "and I hope you have had a pleasant airing." "Yes, ma'am, I thank you. We could not have had a nicer day." "So Mrs. Thorpe said. She was vastly pleased at your all going." "You have seen Mrs. Thorpe, then?" "Yes, I went to the pump room as soon as you were gone, and there I met her, and we had a great deal of talk together. She says there was hardly any veal to be got at market this morning, so it is uncommonly scarce." "Did you see anybody else of your acquaintance?" "Yes, we agreed to take a turn in the Crescent, and there we met Mrs. Hughes and Mr. and Miss Tinley walking with her." "Did you indeed? And did they speak to you?" "Oh, yes, we walked along the Crescent together for half an hour. They seemed very agreeable people. Miss Tinley was in a very pretty spotted muslin, and I fancy, by what I can learn, that she always dresses very handsomely. Mrs. Hughes talked to me a great deal about the family." "And what did she tell you of them?" "Oh, a vast deal indeed. She hardly talked of anything else." "Did she tell you what part of Gloucestershire they came from?" "Yes, she did, but I cannot recollect now. But they were very good kind of people, and very rich. Mrs. Tinley was a Miss Drummond, and she and Mrs. Hughes were schoolfellows, and Miss Drummond had a very large fortune, and when she married, her father gave her £20,000 and 500 to buy wedding clothes. Mrs. Hughes saw all the clothes after they came from the warehouse." "And are Mr. and Mrs. Tinley in Bath?" "Yes, I fancy they are, but I'm not quite certain. Upon recollection, however, I have a notion that they are both dead. At least the mother is. I am sure Mrs. Tinley is dead, because Mrs. Hughes told me that there was a very beautiful set of pearls that Mr. Drummond gave his daughter on her wedding day, and that Miss Tinley has got now, for they were put by her when her mother died." "And is Mr. Tinley, my partner, the only son?" "I cannot be quite positive about that, my dear. I have some idea he is, but, however, he is a very fine young man, Mrs. Hughes says, and likely to do very well." Catherine inquired no further. She had heard enough to feel that Mrs. Allen had no real intelligence to give, and that she was most particularly unfortunate herself in having missed such a meeting with both brother and sister. Could she have foreseen such a circumstance? Nothing should have persuaded her to go out with the others, and, as it was, she could only lament her ill luck and think over what she had lost, till it was clear to her that the drive had by no means been very pleasant, and that John Thorpe himself was quite disagreeable. I'm going to put Meowing Maestro up. We can chat a little bit if you'd like. How's your day been going, Wholesome? I hope it's been going well. Oh, yes, I will go grab Maestro. Hey, Pam. Come on over here. Corell's giving you a treat. And hello, Corell. Come here. I also have to go find Snockings. Little chapter break for some kitty ASMR. What's up? Hey, hey, bud. Hi. Yay. Pansy, come on. He's just sitting on the bed looking at me. Okay, so we've got Snockings here. Here you go, Snockings. Hey, there we go. Yes, come on. That's for you. Come on. Snockings, there's one more right by your paw. Right there. The kitties thank you, Corell. That was all. You got it all. Okay, off my desk. Come on. Thank you. You're so light. Ooh. Light and very topply. Snockings is an old girl. She's going to be turning 17 in a couple of months. Hey, nope. You don't get to drink my tea. Alrighty. So we will get back to it. I hope you slept well, Corell. So we will hide Maestro. There we go. Chapter 10. Oops, sorry. Had that in the way. The Allens, Thorpes, and Morlands all met in the evening at the theatre, and as Catherine and Isabella sat together, there was an opportunity for the latter to utter some view of the many thousand things which she had been collecting within her for the communication in the immeasurable length of time which had divided them. "Oh, heavens, my beloved Catherine, have I got you at last?" was her address on Catherine's entering the box and sitting by her. "Now, Mr. Morland," for he was close to her on the other side, "I shall not speak another word to you all the rest of the evening, so I charge you not to expect it. My sweetest Catherine, how have you been this long age? But I need not ask you, for you look delightfully. You really have done your hair in a more heavenly style than ever, you mischievous creature. Do you want to attract everybody? I assure you my brother is quite in love with you already, and as for Mr. Tinley, that is a settled thing. Even your modesty cannot doubt his attachment now. His coming back to Bath makes it too plain. What would not I give to see him? I really am quite wild with impatience. My mother says he is the most delightful young man in the world. She saw him this morning, you know. You must introduce him to me. Is he in the house now? Look about, for heaven's sakes. I assure you I can hardly exist till I see him." "No," said Catherine, "he is not here. I cannot see him anywhere." "Oh, horrid! Am I never to be acquainted with him? How do you like my gown? I think it does not look amiss. The sleeves were entirely my own thought. Do you know, I get so immoderately sick of Bath. Your brother and I were agreeing this morning that, although it is vastly well to be here for a few weeks, we would not live here for millions. We soon found out that our tastes were exactly alike in preferring the country to every other place. Really, our opinions were so exactly the same, it is quite ridiculous. There was not a single point in which we differed. I would not have had you I would not have had you by for the world. You were such a sly thing. I'm sure you would have made some droll remark or other about it." "No, indeed, I should not." "Oh, yes, you would, indeed. I know you better than you know yourself. You would have told us that we seemed born for each other, or some nonsense of that kind, which would have distressed me beyond conception. My cheeks would have been as red as your roses. I would not have had you by for the world. Indeed, you do me an injustice. I would not have made so improper a remark upon any account, and besides, I am sure it would never have entered my mind. Isabella smiled incredulously, and talked the rest of the evening to James. Catherine's resolution of endeavouring to meet Miss Tinley again continued in full force the next morning, and till the usual moment of going to the pump-room she felt some alarm from the dread of a second prevention. But nothing of the kind occurred. No visitors appeared to delay them, and they all three set off in a good time for the pump-room, where the ordinary course of events and conversations took place. Mr. Allen, after drinking his glass of water, joined some gentlemen to talk over the politics of the day and compare the accounts of their newspapers, and the ladies walked about together, noticing every new face and almost every new bonnet in the room. The female part of the Thorpe family, attended by James Morland, appeared among the crowd in less than a quarter of an hour, and Catherine immediately took her usual place by the side of her friend. James, who was now in constant attendance, maintained a similar position, and separating themselves from the rest of their party, they walked in that manner for some time, till Catherine began to doubt the happiness of a situation which, confining her entirely to her friend and brother, gave her very little share in the notice of either. They were always engaged in some sentimental discussion or lively dispute, but their sentiment was conveyed in such whispering voices, and their vivacity attended with so much laughter, that though Catherine's supporting opinion was not unfrequently called for by one or the other, she was never able to give any from not having heard a word of the subject. At length, however, she was empowered to disengage herself from her friend by the avowed necessity of speaking to Miss Tinley, whom she most joyfully saw just entering the room with Mrs. Hughes, and whom she instantly joined, with a firmer determination to be acquainted than she might have had courage to command, had she not been urged by the disappointment of the day before. Miss Tinley met her with great civility, returned her advances with equal goodwill, and they continued talking together as long as both parties remained in the room. And though in all probability not an observation was made, nor an expression used by either, which had not been, hang on a second, I lost the train of that thought. And though in all probability not an observation was made, nor an expression used by either, which had not been made and used some thousands of times before, under that roof, in every Bath season, yet the merit of their being spoken with simplicity and truth, and without personal conceit, might be something uncommon. Well, how well your brother dances, was an artless... Oh, sorry, I'm going to start that over again. How well your brother dances, was an artless exclamation of Catherine's towards the close of their conversation, which at once surprised and amused her companion. Henry, she replied with a smile. Yes, he does dance very well. He must have thought it very odd to hear me say I was engaged with the other evening, when he saw me sitting down, but I really had been engaged the whole day to Mr. Thorpe. Miss Tinley could only bow. You cannot think, added Catherine after a moment's silence, how surprised I was to see him again. I felt so sure of his being quite gone away. Well, Henry had the pleasure of seeing you before. He was in Bath but for a couple of days. He came only in to engage lodgings for us. That never occurred to me. And of course, not seeing him anywhere, I thought he must have gone. Was not the young lady he danced with on Monday a Miss Smith? Yes, an acquaintance of Mrs. Hughes. I dare say she was very glad to dance. Do you think her pretty? Not very. He never comes to the pump-room, I suppose. Yes, sometimes, but he has rid out this morning with my father. Mrs. Hughes now joined them, and asked Miss Tinley if she was ready to go. hope I shall have the pleasure of seeing you again soon," said Catherine. "Shall you be at the cotillion ball tomorrow?" "Perhaps we— Yes, I think we certainly shall." "I'm glad of it, for we shall all be there." The civility was duly returned, and they parted, on Miss Tinley's side with some knowledge of her new acquaintance's feelings, and on Catherine's without the smallest consciousness of having explained them. She went home very happy. The morning had answered all her hopes, and the evening of the following day was now the object of expectation, the future good. What gown and what headdress she should wear on the occasion became her chief concern. She could not be justified in it. Dress is at all times a frivolous distinction, and excessive solicitude about it often destroys its own aim. Catherine knew all this very well. Her great-aunt had read her a lecture on the subject only the Christmas before, and yet she lay awake 10 minutes on Wednesday night debating between her spotted and her tamboured muslin, and nothing but the softness of the time prevented her buying a new one for the evening. This would have been an error in judgment, great though not uncommon, from which one of the other sex rather than her own, a brother rather than a great-aunt, might have warned her, for man only can be aware of the insensibility of men towards a new gown. It would be mortifying to the feelings of many ladies could they be made to understand how little the heart of man is affected by what is costly or new in their attire, how little it is biased by the texture of their muslin, and how unsusceptible of peculiar tenderness towards the spotted, the sprigged, the mull, or the jaconet. It's weird. I wonder what a jaconet is. Woman is fine for her own satisfaction alone. No man will admire her the more, no woman will like her the better for it. Neatness and fashion are enough for the former, and a something of shabbiness or impropriety will be most endearing to the latter, but not one of these grave reflections troubled the tranquillity of Catherine. She entered the rooms on Thursday evening with feelings very different from what had attended her thither the Monday before. She had then been exulting in her engagement to Thorpe, and was now chiefly anxious to avoid his sight lest he should engage her again, for though she could not, dared not, expect that Mr. Tinley should ask her a third time to dance, her wishes, hopes, and plans all centered in nothing less. Every young lady may feel for my heroine in this critical moment, for every young lady has at some time or other known the same agitation. All have been, or at least all have believed themselves to be, in danger from the pursuit of someone they have wished to avoid, and all have been anxious for the attentions of someone whom they wished to please. As soon as they were joined by the Thorpes, Catherine's agony began. She fidgeted about if John Thorpe came towards her, hid herself as much as possible from his view, and, when he spoke to her, pretended not to hear him. The cotillions were over, the country dancing beginning, and she saw nothing of the Tinleys. "Do not be frightened, my dear Catherine," whispered Isabella, "but I am really going to dance with your brother again. I declare positively it is quite shocking. I tell him he ought to be ashamed of himself, but you and John must keep us in countenance. Make haste, my dear creature, and come to us. John has just walked off, but he will be back in a moment." Catherine had neither time nor inclination to answer. The others walked away. John Thorpe was still in view, and she gave herself up for lost. That she might not appear, however, to observe or expect him, she kept her eyes intently fixed on her fan, and a self-condemnation from her folly, and supporting that among such a crowd they should even meet with the Tinleys in this reasonable time, had just passed through her mind when she suddenly found herself addressed and again solicited to dance by Mr. Tinley himself. with what sparkling eyes and ready motion she granted his request, and with how pleasing a flutter of heart she went with him to the set, may be easily imagined. To escape, and, as she believed, so narrowly escaped John Thorpe, and to be asked so immediately on his joining her, asked by Mr. Tinley, as if he had sought her on purpose. It did not appear to her that life could supply any greater felicity. Scarcely had they worked themselves into a quiet possession of a pace, however, when her attention was claimed by John Thorpe, who stood behind her. "Hey-day, Miss Morland," said he. "What is the meaning of this? I thought you and I were to dance together." "I wonder you should think so, for you never asked me." "That is a good one, by Jove. I asked you as soon as I came into the room, and I was just going to ask you again. But when I turned round, you were gone. It's a cursed shabby trick. I only came for the sake of dancing with you, and I firmly believe you were engaged to me ever since Monday." "Yes, I remember. I asked you while you were waiting in the lobby for your cloak. And here have I been telling all my acquaintance that I was going to dance with the prettiest girl in the room, and when they see you standing up with somebody else, they will quiz me famously." "Oh, no, they will never think of me after such a description as that." "By heavens, if they do not, I will kick them out of the room for blockheads. What chap have you there?" Catherine satisfied his curiosity. "Tinley," he repeated. "I do not know him. A good figure of a man, well put together. Does he want a horse? Here is a friend of mine, Sam Fletcher, has got one to sell that would suit anybody. Famous, clever animal for the road. Only 40 guineas. I had 50 minds to buy it myself, for it was one of my maxims always to buy a good horse when I meet with one. But it would not answer my purpose. It would not do for the field. I would give any money for a real good hunter. I have 3 now, the best that ever were backed. I would not take 800 guineas for them. Fletcher and I mean to get a house in Leicestershire against the next season. It is so darned uncomfortable living at an inn." This was the last sentence by which he could weary Catherine's attention, for he was just then borne off by the resistless pressure of a long string of passing ladies. Her parting now drew near, and said, "That gentleman would have put me out of patience had he stayed with you half a minute longer. He has no business to withdraw the attention of my partner from me. We have entered into a contract of mutual agreeableness for the space of an evening, and all our agreeableness belongs solely to each other for that time. Nobody can fasten themselves on the notice of one without injuring the rights of the other. I consider a country dance as an emblem of marriage. Fidelity and complaisance are the principal duties of both, and those men who do not choose to dance or marry themselves have no business with the partners or wives of their neighbors." "But they are such very different things." "That you think they cannot be compared together?" "To be sure not. People that marry can never part, but must go and keep house together. People that dance only stand opposite each other in a long room for half an hour." "And such is your definition of matrimony and dancing. Taken in that light, certainly their resemblance is not striking, but I think I could place them in such a view. You will allow that in both man has the advantage of choice, women only the power of refusal. That in both it is an engagement between man and woman formed by the advantage of each other, and that when once entered into, they belong exclusively to each other till the moment of its dissolution. That it is their duty each to endeavor to give the other no cause for wishing that he or she had bestowed themselves elsewhere, and their best interest to keep their own imaginations from wandering towards the perfections of their neighbors, or fancying that they should have been better off with anyone else. You will allow all this?" "Yes, to be sure, as you stated, all this sounds very well, but still they are very different. I cannot look upon them at all in the same light, nor think the same duties belong to them." "In one respect there certainly is a difference. In marriage, the man is supposed to provide for the support of the woman to make the home agreeable to the man. That, again, this is like 1800s in society England. The woman to make the home agreeable to the man. He is to purvey, and she is to smile. But in dancing, their duties are exactly changed. The agreeableness, the compliance are expected from him, while she furnishes the fan and the lavender water. That, I suppose, was the difference of duties which struck you as rendering the conditions incapable of comparison. No, indeed, I never thought of that, and I am quite a loss. One thing, however, I must observe, this disposition on your side is rather alarming. You totally disallow any similarity in the obligations, and may I not thence infer that your notions of the duties of the dancing state are not so strict as your partner might wish? Have I not reason to fear that if the gentleman who spoke to you just now were to return, or if any other gentleman were to address you, that there would be nothing to restrain you from conversing with him as long as you chose? Mr. Thorpe is such a very particular friend of my brother's that if he talks to me I must talk to him again. But there are hardly 3 young men in this room besides him that I have any acquaintance with. And is that to be my only security? Alas! Nay, I am sure you cannot have a better, for if I do not know anybody, it is impossible for me to talk to them, and besides, I do not want to talk to anybody. Now you have given me a security worth having, and I shall proceed with courage. Do you find Bath as agreeable as when I had the honor of making the inquiry before? Yes, quite. More so, indeed. More so? Take care, or you will forget to be tired of it at the proper time. You ought to be tired at the end of 6 weeks. I do not think I should be tired if I were to stay here 6 months. Bath, compared with London, has little variety, and so everybody finds out every year. For 6 weeks I allow Bath is pleasant enough, but beyond that it is the most tiresome place in the world. You would be told so by everybody of all descriptions who came regularly every winter, lengthen their 6 weeks into 10 or 12, and go away at last because they can't afford to stay no longer. Well, other people just judge for themselves, and those who go to London may think nothing of Bath, but I, who live in a small retired village in the country, can never find greater sameness in such a place as this than in my own home, for here are a variety of amusements, a variety of things to be seen and done all day long, which I can know nothing of there. You are not fond of the country? Oh, yes, I am. I have always lived there and always been very happy, but certainly there is much more sameness in a country life than in a Bath life. One day in the country is exactly like another. But then you spend your time so much more rationally in the country. Do I? Do you not? I do not believe there is much difference. You are in pursuit only of amusement all day long. And so I am at home, only I do not find so much of it. I walk about here, and so I do there. But here I see a variety of people in every street, and there I can only go and call on Mrs. Allen. Mr. Tinley was very much amused. Only go and call on Mrs. Allen, he repeated. What a picture of intellectual poverty! However, when you sink into this abyss again, you will have more to say. You will be able to talk of Bath, and of all that you did here. Oh, yes, I shall never be in want of anything to talk of again to Mrs. Allen, or anybody else. I really believe I shall always be talking of Bath when I am at home again. I do like it so very much. But I could but have Papa and Mamma and the rest of them here. I suppose I should be too happy. James is coming, my eldest brother. It's quite delightful, and especially as it turns out that the very family we are just got so intimate with are his intimate friends already. Who can ever be tired of Bath? Not those who bring such fresh feelings of every sort to it as you do. Papas and mammas and brothers and intimate friends are a good deal gone by to most of the frequenters of Bath, and the honest relish of balls and plays and everyday sights is past with them. Here their conversation closed, the demands of the dance becoming now too importune for a divided attention. Soon after their reaching the bottom of the set, Catherine perceived herself to be earnestly regarded by a gentleman who stood among the lookers-on immediately behind her partner. He was a very handsome man, of a commanding aspect, past the bloom, but not past the rigor of life, and with his eyes still directed towards her, she saw him presently address Mr. Tinley in a familiar whisper. Confused by his notice, and blushing from the fear of its being excited by something strong in her appearance, she turned away her head. But while she did so, the gentleman retreated, and her partner, coming near, said, "I see that you guess what I have just been asked. That gentleman knows your name, and you have a right to know this. It is General Tinley, my father." Catherine's answer was only, "Oh." But it was an "oh" expressing everything needful, attention to his words, and perfect reliance on their truth. With real interest and strong admiration did her eye follow the general, and as he moved through the crowd, "And how handsome a family they are," was her secret remark. "Oh, okay. Ooh, what are you eating?" In chatting with Miss Tinley before the evening concluded, a new source of vitality arose to her. She had never taken a country walk since her arrival in Bath. Miss Tinley, to whom all the commonly frequented environs were familiar, spoke of them in terms which made her all eagerness to know them too. And on their openly fearing that she might find nobody to go with her, it was proposed by the brother and sister that they should join in a walk some morning or other. "I shall like it," she cried, "beyond anything in the world, and do not let us put it off. Let us go together." This was readily agreed to, with only a proviso for Miss Tinley's that it did not rain, which Catherine was sure it would not. At 12 o'clock they were to call for her in Pulteney Street, and, remember, 12 o'clock was her parting speech to her new friend. Of her older, her more established friend Isabella, of whose fidelity and worth she had enjoyed a fortnight's experience, she scarcely saw anything during the evening, yet, though longing to make her acquaintance with her happiness, she cheerfully submitted to the wish of Mr. Allen, which took them rather early away, and her spirits danced within her as she danced in her chair all the way home. Ooh, ham steaks, yes. Do you cook your ham steaks in a particular way? And mashed potatoes. Ooh, I haven't had mashed potatoes in a while. So do you like your applesauce sweetened? Do you add like cinnamon or anything like that? I agree with Carell. Where is ours? Actually, I have a ham steak, I think. I could make ham steak and Brussels sprouts tonight. Yeah, with cinnamon, of course. I like a little cinnamon. I don't over-cinnamon it. Mostly because I'm not used to it, but yeah, I do like a little bit of cinnamon in my applesauce. When I make ham steak, I do a glaze that is, let's see, maple syrup and mustard powder, and I think I put a little bit of like the squeezy Dijon mustard in it as well, so a little bit of the bite of the vinegar in the squeezy mustard. It's really nice. So yeah, that may be dinner tonight. We'll see. I hope you're enjoying your dinner. It does sound good. So I'll go ahead and Heidmeister will continue for the next chapter. The morrow brought a very sober-looking morning, the sun making only a few efforts to appear, and Catherine augured from it everything most favorable to her wishes. A bright morning so early in the year, she allowed, would generally turn to rain, but a cloudy one foretold improvement as the day advanced. She applied to Mr. Allen for confirmation of her hopes, but Mr. Allen, not having his own skies and barometer about him, declined giving any absolute promise of sunshine. Ooh, yes. Yogurt with chocolate granola. Sounds good. Let's see. She applied to Mrs. Allen, and Mrs. Allen's opinion was more positive. She had no doubt in the world of its being a very fine day if the clouds would only go off and the sun kept out. At about 11 o'clock, however, a few specks of small rain upon the windows caught Catherine's watchful eye, and, "Oh dear, I do believe it will be wet," broke from her in a most desponding voice. "I thought how it would be," said Mrs. Allen. "No walk for me today," sighed Catherine. "But perhaps it may come to nothing, or it may hold up before 12. Perhaps it may, but then, my dear, it will be so dirty." "Oh, that will not satisfy. I never mind dirt, signify." "No," replied her friend very placidly. "I know you never mind dirt." After a short pause, "It comes on faster and faster," said Catherine, as she stood watching at a window. "So it does indeed. If it keeps raining, the streets will be very wet." "There are 4 umbrellas up already. Oh, how I hate the sight of an umbrella." "They are disagreeable things to carry. I would much rather have a chair at any time." "It's such a nice-looking morning. I felt so convinced it would be dry." "Anybody would have thought so, indeed. There will be a very few people in the pump room if it rains all morning. I hope Mr. Allen will put on his greatcoat when he goes, but I dare say he will not, for he had rather do anything in the world than walk out in a greatcoat. I wonder he should dislike it. It must be so comfortable." The rain continued, fast though not heavy. Catherine went every few minutes to the clock, threatening on each return that if it still kept on raining another 5 minutes she would give up the matter as hopeless. The clock struck 12, and it still rained. "You will not be able to go, my dear." I do not quite despair yet. I shall not give it up till 12:15. This is just the time of day for it to clear up, and I do think it looks a little lighter. There, it is 20 minutes after 12, and now I shall give it up entirely. Oh, that we had such weather here as they had in Udolpho, and at least in Tuscany, in the south of France, the night that poor St. Aubin died. Such beautiful weather. At 12:30, when Catherine's anxious attention to the weather was over, and she could no longer claim any merit from its amendment, the sky began voluntarily to clear. A gleam of sunshine took her quite by surprise. She looked round. The clouds were parting, and she instantly returned to the window to watch over and encourage the happy appearance. 10 minutes more made it certain that a bright afternoon would succeed, and justified the opinion of Mrs. Allen, who had always thought it would clear up. But whether Catherine might still expect her friend, whether there had not been too much rain for Miss Tinley to venture, must yet be a question. It was too dirty for Mrs. Allen to accompany her husband to the pump room, so accordingly set off by himself, and Catherine had barely watched him down the street when her notice was claimed by the approach of the same 2 open carriages containing the same 3 people that had surprised her so much a few mornings back. "Oh, hey, Kickin'!" "Oh, no, you have crippling boredom. It's pretty late at night, though, for you. So, you're probably getting ready for bed." How was your day, by the way? You can reply in chat. I will glance over in the beginning, in the middle of the chapter, and then I'll answer in the end. Isabella, my brother, and Mr. Thorpe, I declare. They are coming for me, perhaps, but I shall not go. I cannot go, indeed, for you know Miss Tinley may still call. Mrs. Allen agreed to it. John Thorpe was soon with them, and his voice was with them yet sooner, for on the stairs he was calling out to Miss Moreland to be quick. Make haste, make haste, as he threw open the door. Put on your hat this moment. There is no time to be lost. We are going to Bristol. How do you do, Mrs. Allen? Oh, okay. Not much has happened yet for me today. Just woke up, helped Crystal with, helped somebody with some RuneScape earlier, and yeah, I'll probably do some RuneScape later on, like when I do the game stream. We will see. Do you play RuneScape, Kicken? To Bristol? Is not that a great way off? But, however, I cannot go with you today because I am engaged. I expect some friends every moment. This was, of course, vehemently talked down as no reason at all. Mrs. Allen had called on to second him, and the two others walked in to give their assistance. My sweetest Catherine, is not this delightful? We shall have a most heavenly drive. You are to thank your brother and me for the scheme. It darted into our heads at the breakfast time, I verily believe at the same instant, and we should have been off 2 hours ago if it had not been for this detestable rain. But it does not signify. The nights are moonlight, and we shall do delightfully. Oh, I am in such ecstasies at the thoughts of our little country air and quiet, so much better than going to the lower rooms. We shall drive directly to Clifton and dine there, and as soon as dinner is over, if there is time for it, go on to King's Weston. Oh, I will give him a treat at the chapter break. Ooh, kebab shop. That sounds delicious. Oh, no. I doubt our being able to do much, said Moreland. You croaking fellow, cried Thorpe. We shall be able to do 10 times more. King's Weston, aye, and Blaise Castle too, and anything else we can hear of. But here's our sisters say she will not go. Blaise Castle, cried Catherine. What is that? Finest place in England, worth going 15 miles at any time to see. What, is it really a castle, an old castle? The oldest in the kingdom. But it is like what one reads of? Exactly, the very same. But, now really, are there towers and long galleries? By dozens. Then I should like to see it, but I cannot. I cannot go. Cannot go because... Oh, not go? My beloved creature, what do you mean? I cannot go because... Looking down as she spoke, fearful of Isabella's smile, I expect Miss Tinley and her brother to call on me to take a country walk. They promised to come at 12, only it rained, and now, as it is so fine, I dare say they will be here soon. Not they, indeed, cried Thorpe, for as we turned into Broad Street I saw them. Does he not drive a phaeton with bright chestnuts? I do not know, indeed. Yes, I know he does. I saw him. He was talking of the man you danced with last night. Are not you? Yes. Well, I saw him at the moment turn up the Lansdowne Road, driving a smart-looking girl. Did you indeed? Did upon my soul. Knew him again directly, and he seemed to have got some very pretty cattle, too. It is very odd, but I suppose they thought it would be too dirty for a walk. And well they might, for I never saw so much dirt in my life. Walk. You would no more walk than you could fly. It has been so dirty the whole winter. It is ankle-deep everywhere. Isabella corroborated. My dearest Catherine, you could not form an idea of the dirt. Come, you must go. You cannot refuse going now. I should like to see the castle. But may we go all over it? May we go up every staircase and into every suite of rooms? Yes, every hole and corner. But then If if they should only be gone out for an hour till it is drier, and call by and by, make yourself easy. There is no danger of that, for I heard Tinley hallooing to a man who was just passing by on horseback that they were going as far as Wick's Rocks. Then I will. Shall I go, Mrs. Allen? Just as you please, my dear. Mrs. Allen, you must persuade her to go, was the gentle cry. Mrs. Allen was not inattentive to it. Well, my dear, said she, suppose you go, and in 2 minutes they were off. Catherine's feelings, as she got into the carriage, were in a very unsettled state, divided between regret for the loss of one great pleasure and the hope of soon enjoying another, almost its equal in degree, however unlike in kind. She could not think the Tinleys had acted quite well by her in so readily giving up their engagement without sending her any message of excuse. It was now but an hour later than the time fixed on for the beginning of their walk, and in spite of what she had heard of the prodigious accumulation of dirt in the course of that hour, she could not for her own observation help thinking that they might have gone with very little inconvenience. To feel herself slighted by them was very painful. On the other hand, the delight of exploring an edifice like Udolpho was her fancy represented Blaise Castle to be, was such a counterpoise of good as might console her for almost anything. They passed briskly down Pulteney Street and through Laura Place without the exchange of many words. Thorpe talked to his horse, and she meditated by turns on broken promises and broken arches, phaetons and false hangings, Tinleys and trapdoors. As they entered Argyle Building, however, she was aroused by this address from her companion. "Who was that girl who looked at you so hard as she went by?" "Who? Where?" "On the right-hand pavement. She must be almost out of sight now." Catherine looked round and saw Miss Tinley leaning on her brother's arm, walking slowly down the street. She saw them both looking back at her. "Stop! Stop, Mr. Thorpe!" she cried impatiently. "It is Miss Tinley, it is indeed! How could you tell me they were gone? Stop, stop! I will get out this minute and go to them." But to what purpose did she speak? Thorpe only lashed his horse into a brisker trot. The Tinleys, who had soon ceased to look after her, were in a moment out of sight round the corner of Laura Place, and in another moment she was herself whisked into the market-place. Still, however, enduring the length of another street, she entreated him to stop. Pray stop, Mr. Thorpe. I cannot go on. I will not go on. I must go back to Miss Tinley." But Mr. Thorpe only laughed, smacked his whip, encouraged his horse, made odd noises, and drove on. And Catherine, angry and vexed as she was, having no power of getting away, was obliged to give up the point and submit. Her reproaches, however, were not spared. "How could you deceive me so, Mr. Thorpe? How could you say that you saw them driving up the Lansdowne Road? I would not have had it happen for the world. They must think it so strange, so rude of me to go by them, too, without saying a word. You do not know how vexed I am. I shall have no pleasure at Clifton, nor anything else. I had 10 times rather, get out and walk back to them. How could you say you saw them driving out in a phaeton?" Thorpe defended himself very stoutly, declared that he never saw two men so much alike in his life, and would have hardly given up the point of its having been Tinley himself. Their drive, even when this subject was over, was not likely to be very agreeable. Catherine's complacence was no longer what it had been in their former airing. She listened reluctantly, and her replies were short. Blaise Castle remained her only comfort. Towards that she still looked at intervals with pleasure, though rather than be disappointed at the promised walk, and especially rather than be thought ill of by the Tinleys, She would willingly have given up all the happiness which its walls could supply, the happiness of the progress through a long suite of lofty rooms, exhibiting the remains of magnificent furniture, though now for many years deserted, the happiness of being stopped in their way along narrow, winding vaults by a low, grated door, or even of having their only lamp, extinguished by a sudden gust of wind, of being left in total darkness. In the meanwhile, they proceeded on their journey without any mischance, and were within view of the town at Canesham, when a halloo from Morland, who was behind them, made his friend pull up to know what was the matter. The others then came close enough for conversation, and Morland said, "We'd better go back, Thorpe. It is too late to go on today. Your sister thinks so as well as I. We've been exactly an hour coming from Pulteney Street, very little more than 7 miles, and I suppose we have at least 8 more to go. It will never do. We will set out a great deal too late. We had much better put it off till another day, and turn around." "It is all one to me," replied Thorpe rather angrily, and instantly turning his horse, they were on their way back to Bath. "If your brother had not got such a damned beast to drive," said he sooner afterwards, "we might have done it very well. My horse would have trotted to Clifton within the hour. It left to himself, and I have almost broke my arm with pulling him in that cursed broken-winded jade's place. Morland is a fool for not keeping a horse and gig of his own." "He is not," said Catherine warmly, "for I am sure he could not afford it." "And why cannot he afford it?" "Because he has not money enough." "And whose fault is that?" "Nobody's that I know of." Thorpe then said something in the loud, incoherent way to which he had often recourse about its being a damned thing to its misery, and that if people who rolled in money could not afford things, he did not know who could, which Catherine did not even endeavor to understand. Disappointed of what was to have been the consolation for her first disappointment, she was less and less disposed either to be agreeable herself or to find her companion so, and they returned to Pulteney Street without her speaking 20 words. As she entered the house, the footman told her that a gentleman and a lady had called and inquired for her in a few minutes after her setting off, that when he told them she had gone out with Mr. Thorpe, the lady had asked whether any message had been left for her, and on his saying no, had felt for a card, but said she had none with her about her, and went away. Pondering over these heart-rending tidings, Catherine walked slowly upstairs. At the head of them she was met by Mr. Allen, who, on hearing the reason for her speedy return, said, "I'm glad your brother had so much sense. I'm glad you have come back. It was a strange, wild scheme." They all spent the evening together at Thorpe's. Catherine was disturbed and out of spirits, but Isabella seemed to find a pool of commerce, in the fate of which she shared, by private partnership with Morland, a very good equivalent for the quiet and country air of an inn at Clifton. Her satisfaction, too, in not being in the lower rooms was spoken more than once. "How I pity the poor creatures that are going there. How glad I am that I am not amongst them. I wonder whether it will be full ball or not. They have not begun dancing yet. I would not be here for all the world. It is so delightful to have an evening now and then to oneself. I dare say it will not be a very good ball. I know the Mitchells will be there. I am sure I pity everybody that is. But I dare say, Mr. Morland, you long to be at it, do you not? I'm sure you do. Well, pray do not let anybody here be a restraint on you. I dare say you could do very well without you. We could do very well without you. But you men think yourselves of such consequence." Catherine could almost have accused Isabella of being wanting in tenderness towards herself in her sorrows, so very little did they appear to dwell on her mind, and so very inadequate was the comfort she offered. "Do not be so dull, my dearest creature," she whispered. You will quite break my heart. It is amazing, shocking to be sure, but the Tinleys were entirely to blame. Why were not they more punctual? It was dirty indeed, but what did that signify? I'm sure John and I should not have minded it. I never mind going through anything where a friend is concerned. That is my disposition, and John is just the same. He has amazing strong feelings. Good heavens, what a delightful hand you have got. Kings, I vow. I never was so happy in my life. I would 50 times rather you should have them than myself. And now I may dismiss my heroine in the sleepless couch, which is the true heroine's position, to a pillow strewn with thorns and wet with tears. And lucky may she think herself, if she got another good night's rest in the course of the next 3 months. All right, I am going to read all of your messages, and I will give my show a treat. Okay. One of the nice things about RuneScape is that it is a lot easier to play than a lot of other MMOs. Like, definitely easier than like World of Warcraft and such. Like, I used to play it when I had slow dial-up. It was 26.4K that was my connection speed for about 10 years or so, 10 or 15, something like that. And I was able to play that all right. I mean, it took a while for the updates to load, but once I was in the game, it was fine. I understand about a laptop being slower. Yeah. It was very slow. My old laptop ran it all right. Unfortunately, when I moved here, even though I had a faster connection speed, my computer decided that it didn't want to download things anymore, and so I couldn't get the updated RuneScape, so I had to stop playing for many years. But I'm back and I'm having fun again. Oh, okay, nice. I hope you enjoyed Napoleon Dynamite. It's not my brand of humor, so, I didn't really enjoy it, but I know a lot of people loved it, and still love it to this day, definitely. And, was it Josh Heater? Something Heater. Yeah, I know. Whatever his name is, he is funny. I've seen him in other things and liked him in those. But let's get Maestro that treat. Hey, Nancy. Hey. Yes. You're wanted again. These are from kicking. Come on. Yes. I know. Good. He's just kind of staring at me. Silly boy, come on. You wanted more earlier. Well, it's going to be waiting here, I guess. I think he's more like, I want to go to sleep than anything else. I'm like, I want to go to sleep too. But I'm enjoying the story time. I have heard about Unity, but I don't really know anything about it. Ooh, nice. Yeah, let us know about your game. Like, put it up on the Discord. That'll be interesting to see. I know that Josu was working on a game. I wonder if he ever finished it. I'll have to ask him. What kind of game is it going to be? Is it going to be like an RPG? Is it going to be like a shooter game or a roguelike or something like that? Well, while you tell me about it, I'll go ahead and continue with the story, and then I will get caught up at the next chapter, Rick. Chapter 12. "Mrs. Allen," said Catherine the next morning, "will there be any harm in my calling on Miss Tinley today? I shall not be easy until I have explained everything." "Go by all means, my darling, only put on a white gown. Miss Tinley always wears white." Catherine cheerfully complied, and being properly equipped, was more impatient than ever to be at the pump room, that she might inform herself of General Tinley's lodgings, for though she believed they were in Milsom Street, she was not certain of the house, and Mrs. Allen's wavering convictions only made it more doubtful. To Milsom Street she was directed, and having made her perfect in the number, hastened away with eager steps and a beating heart to pay her visit, explained her conduct, and be forgiven, tripping lightly through the churchyard and resolutely turning away her eyes, for she might not be obliged to see her beloved Isabella than her dear family, who, she had reason to believe, were in a shop hard by. She reached the house without any impediment. Looking at the number, knocked at the door, and inquired for Miss Tinley. The man believed Miss Tinley to be at home, but was not quite certain. Would she be pleased to send up her name? She gave her card. In a few minutes the servant returned, and with a look which did not quite confirm his words, said he had been mistaken, for that Miss Tinley was walked out. Catherine, with a blush of mortification, left the house. She felt almost persuaded that Miss Tinley was at home, and too much offended to admit her, and as she retired down the street could not withhold one glance at the drawing-room window, in expectation of seeing her there, but no one appeared at them. At the bottom of the street, however, she looked back again, and then, not at a window, but issuing from the door, she saw Miss Tinley herself. She was followed by a gentleman, whom Catherine believed to be her father, and they turned up towards Edgar's building. Catherine, in deep mortification, proceeded on her way. She could almost be angry with herself at such angry incivility, but she checked the resentful sensation. She remembered her own ignorance. She knew not how such an offence as hers might be classed by the laws of worldly politeness, to what a degree of unforgiveness it might have with propriety lead, nor to what rigors of rudeness in return it might justly make her amenable. Dejected and humbled, she had even some thoughts of not going with the others to the theatre that night, but it must be confessed that they were not of long continuance, for she soon recollected, in the first place, that she was without any excuse for staying at home, and in the second, that it was a play she wanted very much to see. To the theatre, accordingly, they all went. No Tinleys appeared to plague or please her. She feared that, amongst the many perfections of the family, a fondness for plays was not to be ranked. Perhaps it was because they were habituated to the finer performance of the London stage, which she knew, on Isabella's authority, rendered everything else to the kind quite horrid. She was not deceived in her own expectation of pleasure. The comedy so well suspended her care that no one, observing her during the first 4 acts, would have supposed she had been any wretchedness about her. On the beginning of the 5th, however, the sudden view of Mr. Henry Tinley and his father joining a party in the opposite box recalled her to anxiety and distress. The stage could no longer excite genuine merriment, no longer keep her whole attention. Every other look, upon an average, was directed towards the opposite box. And, for the space of 2 entire scenes, did she thus watch Henry Tinley, without being once able to catch his eye. No longer could he be suspected of indifference for a play. His notice was never withdrawn from the stage during 2 whole scenes. At such length, however, he did look towards her, and he bowed. Such a bow! No smile, no continued observance attended it. His eyes were immediately returned to their former direction. Catherine was restlessly miserable. She could almost have run around to the box in which he sat and forced him to hear her explanation. Feelings rather natural than heroic possessed her, instead of considering her own dignity injured by his ready condemnation. Instead of proudly resolving, in conscious innocence, to show her resentment towards him who could harbor a doubt of it, to leave to him all the trouble of seeking an explanation, and to enlighten him on the past only by avoiding his sight or flirting with somebody else. She took herself all the shame of misconduct, or at least of its appearance, and was only eager for any opportunity of explaining its cause. The play concluded. The curtain fell. Henry Tinley was no longer to be seen where he had hitherto sat, but his father remained, and perhaps he might be now coming round to their box. She was right. In a few minutes he appeared, and making his way through and the then thinning rows, spoke with like calm politeness to Mrs. Allen and her friend. Not with such calmness was he answered by the latter. "Oh, Mr. Tinley, I have been quite wild to speak with you and make my apologies. You must have thought me so rude, but indeed it was not my fault, was it, Mrs. Allen? Did not they tell me that Mr. Tinley and his sister were gone out in a phaeton together? And then what could I do? But I had 10,000 times rather have been with you. Now had not I, Mrs. Allen?" "My dear, you tumble my gown," was Mrs. Allen's reply. Her assurance, however, standing sole as it did, was not thrown away. It brought a more cordial, more natural smile into his countenance, and he replied in a tone which retained only a little affected reserve. "We were much obliged to you at any rate for wishing us a pleasant walk after our passing you in Argyle Street. You were so kind as to look back on purpose." "But indeed I did not wish you a pleasant walk. I never thought of such a thing, but I begged Mr. Thorpe so earnestly to stop. I called out to him as soon as ever I saw you. Now, Mrs. Allen did not— Oh, you were not there, but indeed I did, and if Mr. Thorpe would only have stopped, I would have jumped out and run after you." Oh, hang on a second. Oh, no, I'm so sorry. Hi, UK. I'm so glad to see you. I am in the middle of a chapter, but it's a short chapter. I'll reply in a moment. Let's see. "But indeed, I did not wish you—" Oh, that I already read that one. "Is there a Henry in the world who could be insensible to such a declaration?" Henry Tinley, at least, was not. With a yet sweeter smile, he said everything that need be said of his sister's concern, regret, and dependence on Catherine's honor. "Oh, do not say Miss Tinley was not angry," cried Catherine, "because I know she was, for she would not see me this morning when I called. I saw her walk out of the house the next minute after my leaving it. I was hurt, but I was not affronted. Perhaps you did not know I had been there." "I was not within at the time, but I heard of it from Eleanor, and she had been wishing ever since to see you, to explain the reason of such incivility. But perhaps I can do it as well. It was nothing more than that my father— they were just preparing to walk out, and he, being hurried for time and not caring to have it put off, made a point of her being denied. That was all, I do assure you. She was very much vexed, and meant to make her apology as soon as possible." Catherine's mind was greatly eased by this information, yet a something of solicitude remained, from which sprang the following question, thoroughly artless in itself, though rather distressing to the gentleman. "But, Mr. Tinley, why were you less generous than your sister? If she felt such confidence in my good intentions, and could suppose it to be only a mistake, why should you be so ready to take offence?" "Me? I take offence? Nay, I am sure by your look when you came into the box you were angry." "I angry? I could have no right." "Well, anybody would have thought you had no right who saw your face," she replied by asking her to make room for him and talking of the play. He replied by asking her to make room for him and talking of the play. He remained with them some time, and was only too agreeable for Catherine to be contented with when he went away. Before they parted, however, it was agreed that the projected walk should be taken as soon as possible, and setting aside the misery of his quitting their box, she was, upon the whole, left one of the happiest creatures in the world. While talking to each other, she had observed with some surprise that John Thorpe, who was never in the same part of the house for 10 minutes together, was engaged in conversation with General Tinley, and she felt something more than surprise when she thought she could perceive herself the object of their attention and discourse. What could they have to say? She feared General Tinley did not like her appearance. She found it was implied in his preventing her admittance to his daughter, rather than postpone his own walk a few minutes. "How came Mr. Thorpe to know your father?" was her anxious inquiry, as she pointed them out. How came Mr. Thorpe to know your father? Was her anxious inquiry, as she pointed them out to her companion. He knew nothing about it, but his father, like every military man, had a very large acquaintance. When the entertainment was over, Thorpe came to assist them in getting out. Catherine was the immediate object of his gallantry, and while they waited in the lobby for a chair, he prevented the inquiry, which had travelled from her heart almost to the tip of her tongue, by asking in a consensual manner whether she had seen him talking with General Tinley. "He's a fine old fellow, upon my soul, stout, active, looks as young as his son. I have a great regard for him, I assure you, gentleman-like, good sort of fellow as ever lived." "But how came you to know him?" "Know him? There are few people much about town that I do not know. I've met him forever at the Bedford, and I knew his face once again the moment he came into the billiard-room. One of the best players we have, by the by, and we had a little touch together, though I was almost afraid of him at first. The odds were 5-4 against me, and if I had not made one of the cleanest strokes that perhaps ever was made in this world, I took his ball exactly, but I could not make you understand it without a table, however. However, I did beat him. A very fine fellow, as rich as a miser. I should like to dine with him. I dare say he gives famous dinners. But what do you think we have been talking of? You, yes, by heavens, and the General thinks you the finest girl in Bath." "Oh, nonsense." "How can you say so?" "And what do you think I said?" lowered his voice. "Well done, General," said I am quite of your mind." Here Catherine, who was much less gratified by his admiration than by General Tinley's, was not sorry to be called away by Mr. Allen. Thorpe, however, would see her to her chair, and till she entered it, continued the same kind of delicate flattery, in spite of her entreating him to have done. That General Tinley, instead of disliking, should admire her, was very delightful, and she joyfully thought that there was not one of the family whom she need now fear to meet. The evening had done more, much more, for her than could have been expected. Alrighty, I will go grab stockings. And I'll try to encourage Maestro back as well, because his treat's still waiting for him. Nancy. Okay, I'll bring you to the bed, I guess. Here, Nancy. That's from Kippen. Careful. Come on, Darrell has another treat for you. Come here, Stockings. Come on. Buffalo. Come here. Up. More treats. Come here. Oh. There you go. Right there. Oh. have my little cat thing up there. There we go. I hope you're enjoying your lurk, UK. Sorry about Nightbot being so trigger happy with the timing outs. I need to remember to adjust that. Can you remind me in Discord? I'm hoping that I can remember to do it. Alright, let's see. Adjust Nightbot. And I hope you're having a good morning. Alright. And we're back. Chapter 13. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday have now passed in review before the reader the events of each day, its hopes and fears, mortifications and pleasures, and have been separately stated, and the pangs of Sunday only now remain to be described and close the week. The Clifton scheme had been deferred, not relinquished, and on the afternoon's crescent of this day it was brought forward again. In a private consultation between Isabella and James, the former of whom had particularly set her heart upon going, and the latter no less anxiously placed his heart upon pleasing her, it was agreed that, provided the weather were fair, the party should take place on the following morning, and they were to set off very early in order to be home in good time. The affair thus determined, and Thorpe's approbation secured, Catherine only remained to be apprised of it. She had left them for a few minutes to speak to Miss Tinley. In that interval the plan was completed, and as soon as she came again, her agreement was demanded. But instead of the gay acquiescence expected by Isabella, Catherine looked grave, was very sorry, but could not go. The engagement, which ought to have kept her from joining in the former attempt, would make it impossible for her to accompany them now. She had that moment settled with Miss Tinley to make their promised walk tomorrow. It was quite determined, and she would not upon any account retract. But that she must and should retract was instantly the eager cry of both the Thorpes. They must go to Clifton tomorrow. They would not go without her. It would be nothing to put off a mere walk for one day longer, and they would not hear of a refusal. Catherine was distressed, but not subdued. "Do not urge me, Isabella. I am engaged to Miss Tinley. I cannot go." This availed nothing. The same arguments assailed her again. She must go. She should go, and they would not hear of the refusal. It would be so easy to tell Miss Tinley that you had just been reminded of a prior engagement, and must only beg to put off the walk till Tuesday. No, it would not be easy. I could not do it. There has been no prior engagement. But Isabella became only more and more urgent, calling on her in the most affectionate manner, addressing her by the most endearing names. She was sure her sweetest, dearest Catherine would not seriously refuse such a trifling request to a friend who dearly loved her. She knew her beloved Catherine to have so feeling a heart, so sweet a temper, to be so easily persuaded by those she loved. But all in vain. Catherine felt herself to be in the right, and though pained by such tender, such flattering supplications, could not allow it to influence her. Isabella then tried another method. She reproached with having more affection for Miss Tinley, though she had known her so little a while, than for her best and oldest friend, with being grown cold and indifferent, in short, towards herself. "I cannot help being jealous, Catherine, when I see myself slighted for strangers, I, who love you so excessively.
When once my affections are placed, it is not in the power of anything to change them. But I believe my feelings are stronger than anybody's. I am sure they are too strong for my own peace, and to see myself supplanted in your friendship by strangers does cut me to the quick, I own. These Tinleys seem to swallow up everything else." Catherine thought this reproach equally strange and unkind. Was it the part of a friend thus to expose her feelings to the notice of others? Isabella appeared to her ungenerous and selfish, regardless of everything but her own gratification. These painful ideas crossed her mind, though she said nothing. Isabella, in the meantime, had applied her handkerchief to her eyes, and Morland, miserable at such a sight, could not help saying, "Nay, Catherine, I think you cannot stand out any longer. The sacrifice is not much to oblige such a friend. I shall think you quite unkind if you still refuse." This was the first time of her brother's openly siding against her, and anxious to avoid his displeasure, she proposed a compromise. If they would only but put their scheme till Tuesday, which they might easily do, as it depended only on themselves, she could go with them, and everybody might then be satisfied. But no, it was the immediate answer. That could not be, for Thorpe did not know that he might go to town on Tuesday. Catherine was sorry, but could do no more, and a short silence ensued, which was broken by Isabella, who in a voice of cold resentment said, "Very well, then there is an end of the party. If Catherine does not go, I cannot. I cannot be the only woman. I would not upon any account in the world do so improper a thing." "Catherine, you must go," said James. "But why cannot Mr. Thorpe drive one of his other sisters? I dare say either of them would like to go." "Thank ye," cried Thorpe, "but I did not come to Bath to drive my sisters about and look like a fool. No, if you do not go, damn me if I do. I only go for the sake of driving you." "That is a compliment which gives me no pleasure." But her words were lost on Thorpe, who had turned abruptly away. The three others still continued together, walking in a most uncomfortable manner. To poor Catherine, sometimes not a word was said. Sometimes she was again attacked with supplications or reproaches, and her arm was still linked within Isabella's, though their hearts were at war. At one moment she was softened, at another irritated, always distressed, but always steady. "I did not think you had been so obstinate, Catherine," said James. "You were not used to be so hard. To persuade. You once were the kindest, best-tempered of my sisters." "I hope I am not less so now," she replied very feelingly. "But indeed I cannot go. If I am wrong, I am doing what I believe to be right." "I suspect," said Isabella in a low tone, "there is no great struggle." Catherine's heart swelled. She drew away her arm, and Isabella made no objection. Thus, passing along 10 minutes, till they were again joined by Thorpe, who, coming to them with a gayer look, said, "Well, I have settled the matter, and now we may all go tomorrow with a safe conscience. I have been to Miss Tinley, and made your excuses." "You have not!" cried Catherine. "I have, upon my soul. Left her this moment, told her you had sent me to say that, having just recollected a prior engagement of going to Clifton with us tomorrow, you could not have the pleasure of walking with her till Tuesday. She said very well. Tuesday was just as convenient to her, so there is an end to all our difficulties. Pretty good thought of mine, eh?" Isabella's countenance was once more all smiles and good humour, and James, too, looked happy again. "A most heavenly thought indeed. Now, my sweet Catherine, all our distresses are over. You are honourably acquitted, and we shall have a most delightful party." "This will not do," said Catherine. "I cannot submit to this. I must run after Miss Tinley directly and set her right." Isabella, however, caught hold of one hand, Thorpe of the other, and remonstrances poured in from all three. Even James was quite angry.
When everything was settled, when Miss Tinley herself said that Tuesday would suit her as well, it was quite ridiculous, quite absurd to make any further objection. "I do not care! Mr. Thorpe had no business to invent such a message. If I had thought it right to put it off, I could have spoken to Miss Tinley myself. This is only doing it in a ruder way. And how do I know that Mr. Thorpe has? He may be mistaken again, perhaps. He led me into one act of rudeness by his mistake on Tuesday. Let me go, Mr. Thorpe. Isabella, do not hold me." Thorpe told her it would be in vain to go after the Tinleys. They were turning the corner at Block Street when he had overtaken them, and were at home by this time. "Then I will go after them," said Catherine. "Wherever they are, I will go after them. It does not signify talking. If I could not be persuaded into doing what I thought wrong, I never will be tricked into it." And with these words, she broke away and hurried off. Thorpe would have darted after her, but Morland withheld him. Let her go if she will go. She is as obstinate as—" Thorpe never finished the simile, for it could hardly have been a proper one. Away walked Catherine in great agitation, as fast as the crowd would permit her, fearful of being pursued, yet determined to persevere. As she walked, she reflected on what had passed. It was painful for her to disappoint and displease them, particularly to displease her brother, but she could not repent her resistance. Setting her own inclination apart, to have failed a second time in her engagement to Miss Tinley, to have retracted a promise voluntarily made only 5 minutes before, and on a false pretense, too, must have been wrong. She had not been withstanding with them on selfish principles alone. She had not consulted merely her own gratification. That might have been ensured in some degree by the excursion itself, by seeing Blaise Castle. No, she had attended to that, to what was due to others, and to her own character in their opinion. Her conviction of being right, however, was not enough to restore her composure. Till she had spoken to Miss Tinley, she could not be at ease, and quickening her pace when she got clear of the crescent, she almost ran over the remaining ground till she gained the top of Milsom Street. So rapid had been her movements that in spite of the Tinleys' advantage in the outset, they were but just turning into their lodgings as she came within view of them, and the servant, still remaining at the open door, she used only the ceremony of saying that she must speak with Miss Tinley that moment, and hurrying by him proceeded upstairs. Then, opening the first door before her, which happened to be the right, she immediately found herself in the drawing-room with General Tinley, his son, and daughter. Her explanation, defective only in being, from her irritation of nerves and shortness of breath, no explanation at all was instantly given. "I am come in a great hurry. It was all a mistake. I never promised to go. I told him from the first I could not go. I ran away in a great hurry to explain it. I did not care what you thought of me. I would not stay for the servant." The business, however, though not perfectly elucidated by this speech, soon ceased to be a puzzle. Catherine found that John Thorpe had given the message, and Miss Tinley had no scruple in owning herself greatly surprised by it. But whether her brother had still exceeded in her in resentment, Catherine thought she instinctively addressed herself as much to one as to the other in her vindication, had no means of knowing. Whatever might have been felt before her arrival, her eager declarations immediately made every look and sentence as friendly as she could desire. The affair thus happily settled, she was introduced by Miss Tinley to her father, and received by him with such solicitous politeness as recalled Thorpe's information to her mind, and made her think with pleasure that he might be sometimes depended on. To such anxious attention was the general civility carried, that not aware of her extraordinary swiftness in entering the house, he was quite angry with the servant whose neglect had reduced her to open the door of the apartment herself. What did William mean by it? You should make a point of inquiring into the matter. And if Catherine had not most warmly asserted his innocence, it seemed likely that William would lose the favor of his masters forever, if not his place, by her rapidity. After sitting with him a quarter of an hour, she rose to take leave, and was then most agreeably surprised by General Tinley's asking her if she would do his daughter the honor of dining and spending the rest of the day with her. Miss Tinley added her own wishes. Catherine was greatly obliged, but it was quite out of her power. Mr. and Mrs. Allen would expect her back every moment. The General declared he could say no more. The claims of Mr. and Mrs. Allen were not to be superseded, but on some other day, he trusted, when longer notice could be given, they would not refuse to spare her to a friend. Oh no, Catherine was sure they would not have the least objection, and she could have great pleasure in coming. The General attended her himself to the street door, saying everything gallant as they went downstairs, admiring the elasticity of her walk, which corresponded exactly with the spirit of her dancing, and making her one of the most graceful bows she could ever behold when they parted. Catherine, delighted by all that had passed, proceeded gaily to Pulteney Street, walking, as she concluded, with great elasticity, though she had never thought of it before. She reached home without seeing anything more of the offended party, and now that she had been triumphant throughout, had carried her point, and was secure of her walk. She began, as the flutter of her spirits subsided, to doubt whether she had been perfectly right. A sacrifice was always noble, been spared, and if she had given way to the entreaties, she should have been spared the distressing idea of a friend displeased, a brother angry, and a scheme of great happiness to both destroyed, perhaps through her means. To ease her mind and ascertain by the opinion of the unprejudiced person what her own conduct had really been, she took occasion to mention before Mr. Allen the half-settled scheme of her brother and the Thorpes for the following day. Mr. Allen caught at it directly. "Well," he said, "and do you think of going too?" "No, I just engaged myself to walk with Miss Tinley before they told me of it, and therefore you know I could not go with them, could I?" "No, certainly not, and I am glad you did not think of it. Those schemes are not at all the thing. Young men and women driving about the country in open carriages, now and then it is very well, but going to inns and public places together, that is not right, and I wonder Mrs. Thorpe should allow it. I am glad you do not think of going. I am sure Mrs. Morland would not be pleased. Mrs. Allen, are not you of my way of thinking? Do not you think these people of kind of projects objectionable?" "Yes, very much so indeed. Open carriages are nasty things. A clean gown is not 5 minutes wear in them. You are splashed getting in and getting out, and the wind takes your hair and your bonnet in every direction. Oh, I hate open carriage myself." "I know you do, but that is not the question. Do not you think it has any odd appearance, if young ladies are frequently driving about in them by young men to whom they are not even related?" "Yes, my dear, a very odd appearance indeed. I cannot bear to see it." "Dear madam," cried Catherine, "then why did not you tell me so before? I am sure if I had known it to be improper, I would not have gone with Mr. Thorpe at all. But I always hoped you would tell me if you thought I was doing wrong." "And so I should, my dear, you may depend on it, for as I told Mrs. Morland at parting, I should always do the best for you in my power. But one must not be over-particular. Young people will be young people, as your mother always says herself. You know I wanted you, when we first came, not to buy those sprigged muslin, but you would. Young people do not like to be always thwarted." "But this was something of real consequence, and I do not think you would have found me hard to persuade." As far as it has gone hitherto, there's no harm done, said Mr. Allen. Oh, that was Mrs. Allen's voice, sorry. And I would only advise you, my dear, not to go out with Mr. Thorpe any more. That is just what I was going to say, added his wife. Catherine, relieved for herself, felt uneasy for Isabella, and after a moment's thought asked Mr. Allen whether it would not be both proper and kind in her to write to Miss Thorpe and explain the indecorum of which she must be as insensible as herself, for she considered that Isabella might otherwise perhaps be going to Clifton the next day in spite of what had passed. Mr. Allen, however, discouraged her from doing any such thing. "You'd better leave her alone, my dear. She is old enough to know what she is about, and if not, has a mother to advise her. Mrs. Thorpe is too indulgent beyond a doubt, but, however, you had better not interfere. She and your brother chose to go, and you will only be getting ill will." Catherine submitted, and though sorry to think that Isabella should be doing wrong, felt greatly relieved by Mr. Allen's approbation of her own conduct, and truly rejoiced to be preserved by his advice from the danger of falling into such an error herself. Her escape from being one of the party to Clifton was now an escape indeed. For what would the Tinleys have thought of her if she had broken her promise to them in order to do what was wrong in itself, if she had been guilty of one breach of propriety only to enable her to be guilty of another? Well, we have reached the end of the story time today. Wow, talk about peer pressure with that one. Oof. It's like watching a teen movie. Well, I think I'm going to take a small break, and then I will be back with some RuneScape. Not sure if I want to do some more dungeons and dungeoneering if anybody wants to join me, or I might do some quests because I haven't done any quests so far. Wait, I've done 2. They were very, very, very low level quests. Yeah, we'll see. Or I might do some exploring there. We will see. Anyways, I hope you stick around, but if not, I hope you have a great rest of your day or whatever time zone you are. Next story time is going to be on Sunday, 2 to 4 as usual, and we will be continuing with Northanger Abbey. Oh, okay. Yeah, I hope you get better, Corral. It is so miserable being sick. But yeah, I hope you stay warm, you eat and drink and be as healthy as you possibly can, and get some good rest. Anyways, to those who will be staying, I'll see you in a few moments. I will let you know in chat when I am back. Bye.